Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you for being here. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude for this Honoris Causa award to Corvinus University of Budapest. I'm deeply honored by the acknowledgement of my work. I attribute my contributions in science and business studies to many people who have influenced and encouraged me throughout my career. In these remarks today, I want to thank those people. I will share highlights of my intellectual journey so you get an understanding of where I am coming from. And I will give you impressions about where I think things stand now and the direction in which we are headed in the future. Particularly for students in this room, I think it will be interesting to understand where the world is headed and what we in business and economics departments need to do about it. In that context, I will examine the role of business and economics departments in education. So let me begin by thanking Vice Rector Zoltán Santo and Professor Laszlo Zolnai for bringing me here. Thank you for your kind words throughout the 2 days that I have been here and for your efforts in making today's event possible. And thank you to Corvinus University Senate, as well as the faculty and students who have made me feel so welcome. I feel I am within my own intellectual family here. And my deep thanks to all the guests who are present here today to celebrate this award. There are many thinkers and researchers, many mentors whose ideas have influenced me over the past 50 years. As a college undergraduate, I studied mechanical engineering. And then I did graduate studies in management and economics. 2 of my professors from the University of Pittsburgh, Ian Mitroff and John Grant, helped me to stretch my interest beyond engineering, beyond technology, to sociology, anthropology, systems theory, and to the philosophy of science. I was especially influenced by the works of C. West Churchman and Karl Polanyi, a Hungarian economist. I also want to thank 3 women who have been my greatest teachers: my mother, my wife, and my daughter. 3 generations of women. My mother, Navita Shrivastava, prioritized education and books over all else. Each and every day throughout my childhood, it was she who instilled in me a love of knowledge and of reading, and the confidence that learning and education could be my path to freedom and to a full life. My wife, Michelle Cooper, who's here today, always revered knowledge and admired people who pursue it. She even married me 44 years ago when I was still a doctoral student at the University of Pittsburgh. She unconditionally encouraged and supported my academics career in myriad of ways, from typing my doctoral dissertation to taking care of our lives together while I was reading and writing. And my daughter and her generation, Claudia Shrivastava, she's an intellectual, a business executive, and a sci-fi author. She gives me hope that her generation and coming generations understand the existential risks and challenges that are facing humanity, and that this generation is up to the task of bringing about the necessary transformation. So I look to hope, with hope, to the new generation. I also want to thank my research collaborators and co-seekers of knowledge. There have been too many to recount them individually over here, but I want to mention 2 that are present in this room: Professor Zolnai, with whom I have worked for over a decade now, and also Professor Wendelin Cooper, who is visiting here from Karlsruhe, Germany. So that's for thanks. Now let me turn to a few words about my intellectual journey. How did a kid from Bhopal, India, get to Budapest, Hungary, to receive an honorary doctorate? In doctoral programs, those of you who are graduate students know this, we advise graduate students to identify novel problems to research. We tell them to review the literature and look for gaps, what has not been addressed, what are the theoretical and conceptual gaps. Then we advise them to develop theories and to execute research studies to fill gaps. This is typically how advanced research gets done. Well, I did not follow this advice. I have always preferred to choose my intellectual pursuits, my research questions, from the real world. My aspiration has always been to not just understand the world and document it, but rather to impact it. My intellectual motivation was to study the world to change it, hopefully for the better. Let me give you some examples. In December 1984, the world was struck by the Bhopal disaster at a Union Carbide plant in India. That industrial accident killed over 10,000 people. It is still considered to be the worst industrial accident in history. For me, it represented a humongous failure of organizations, organizational strategy, and a huge technological failure. It spawned a social crisis in Bhopal and a political crisis in the state of Madhya Pradesh, where Bhopal is located, as well as in India as a country. It derailed US-India relations for almost a decade because of the conflicts that followed that industrial accident. Bhopal is my birthplace, where I lived for 23 years. At the time of the accident, I was an untenured assistant professor at New York University's Stern School of Business, studying in the field of strategic management. Many of my senior colleagues, full professors in my department, advised me to not get involved in studying Bhopal. They said it was politically a sensitive matter, Union Carbide being a very major American corporation. They said that I would not be able to do scientifically objective study of the disaster because Bhopal was my hometown. Against their well-intentioned advice and warning, I jumped into studying the Bhopal disaster. I was just very curious to understand how technology can go so wrong that it can kill 10,000 people. I developed a conceptual framework and empirical understandings of industrial crises. I developed ways for corporations to deal with crisis anticipation and crisis management. I published a book on Bhopal and several dozen journal articles on crisis management. I launched a journal and created an institute for the study of industrial crises. It was an academically very successful project. The moral case for crisis management also was widely accepted by then. However, most companies thought that such events were very rare and they would not happen to our company. Few companies found the motivation to make deep transformations within themselves to avoid crises. So while academically it was a successful project, in practical terms it had limited impact. In 1969, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its first synthesis report on climate change, followed in the 1990s with numerous and repeated warnings that climate was changing. They came from National Academies of Sciences and the global environmental research programs. In my research, I applied the lessons of these reports to examining the role of business and corporations in environmental problems and climate change. That spawned a decade of my own research on ecocentric management and sustainability of corporations. I published a book and several papers and founded the organization, the Natural Environment Division of the Academy of Management, which still remains the largest academic association of management scholars. This brought the topic of environmental sustainability squarely into the field of management research. Again, a topic, the project was successful in academic terms, very productive for me, and also very positive for my career. But in terms of changing the world, it had limited impact. In 2001, I turned 50. The 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center by Al-Qaeda was a seminal moment for me. The world seemed fragile and breaking down. The order and discipline that I had taken for granted seemed to be eroding. I took some time off from my academic work, and I went and started a company, eSocrates. We developed academic software for online education. Going outside of academia for a few years and immersing myself in the world of business and practice opened up this world without disciplines, thinking without being siloed into small boxes. Everyone did what was needed to understand and solve problems and make impacts and get results. This way of working heightened my interest in transdisciplinarity. When I returned to academia 4 years later, I experimented with transdisciplinarity by trying to integrate across disciplines. My work sought to integrate business studies with social and natural sciences. In subsequent years, I went further, integrating social and natural sciences with the arts and humanities, and with integrating research with practice and impact. This experience led me to my next pursuit of transdisciplinarity and work for Future Earth. Future Earth was an interesting organization. It was a combination of all prior environmental research programs. For those of you who don't understand the history of environmental research around the world, much of environmental research began after the Stockholm Environmental Conference in 1972. The global science community came together and formed 4 major research programs. They included the International Geosphere-Biosphere Program that made a measurement of the chemistry, the biogeochemistry of Earth systems. The second was the International Human Dimensions Program. A third one was Diversitas, which was an international biodiversity program. And then the fourth one was World Meteorological Organization's climate change programs. I can't emphasize more the importance of these 4 programs to our current understanding of the world. Everything that you read at IPCC or everything that you see underlying sustainable development goals, all the science has been created by these programs. They started in 1972. In 2012, at the Rio Plus 20 summit, there was a profound realization that all these programs were producing great science. We were identifying problems, we were measuring these problems to the 4th decimal place. But on every single sustainability period in those 40 years, we had become worse. Whether it was deforestation, or whether it was carbon in the atmosphere, or whether it was dying lakes, or whether it was acid rain, on everything. We knew what was happening, but we were not doing anything about it. So in 2012, the science community came together and said, science needs to become transdisciplinary. Sustainability sciences are meaningless if they don't actually have an impact on the problem. So they created Future Earth as an umbrella organization to take these 4 programs, 50,000 scientists from around the world within these programs, and get them to move towards transdisciplinarity, which at that time meant co-creation of knowledge with stakeholders, with communities, and doing it in a way that actually made a difference to the world, which means implementing the recommendations that science was coming up with. These science mega programs under Future Earth made some amount of impact, I would think. They at least instilled the idea of transdisciplinarity as a legitimate scientific approach. We made many useful contributions to the formulation of IPCC reports. In fact, virtually everything that IPCC puts out comes from this network of 50,000 scientists. We provided the inputs into formulation of sustainable development goals, which were adopted by 197 nations in 2015. We helped create the biodiversity COPs and the UN FCC COPs. So a lot of the science started to come towards policy making and started having impact on policy making. I would say that was modest progress. Future Earth experience, I was the first executive director of Future Earth, and I helped set up the secretariat and build the programs and provide the necessary frameworks. But it reinforced my faith in transdisciplinarity. When I left Future Earth, I arrived at Penn State University, Pennsylvania State University, which is, it's a very large university I'll describe to you in a second. And I came there as their first chief sustainability officer because they wanted to make a university sustainable. And they invited me to look at how you could integrate sustainability 360 degrees into all aspects of a university's operation: teaching, students, doing research, the operations, the buildings, community outreach, student life, everything was in the portfolio. It was a very interesting experience because Penn State University is like a little country. It has 23 campuses. It has 100,000 student enrollment at that time. It had 13 colleges and an annual budget of $9 billion. Just to put $9 billion in perspective, there are 40 countries in the world that don't have a GDP of $9 billion. So we are really talking about a very significant operation which had many, many ecological impacts, and there was a lot of opportunity to change things. And I was gratified to be working with the upper administration and getting them to understand what sustainability was about, getting them to invest in sustainability programs and projects. We created the largest solar power plant in the state of Pennsylvania, eliminated the use of all coal for our energy needs, and cut our carbon emissions by 25%. We established the UN Sustainable Development Goals as the framework for university research and curriculum, so that every research project, and we do $1.3 billion worth of university research each year, but every research project now has to show what kind of contribution it is making to sustainable development goals. We incorporated sustainability courses into the curriculum for every graduating student. We created an organizational structure so that in each business unit of the university, there was a sustainability council of about 6 to a dozen members who were on the ground, sort of boots on the ground, trying to bring about sustainability into every division and unit of the organization. From there, I went to the Club of Rome in 2018, and since then I've been learning from my global colleagues who are doing amazing work in sustainability in different parts of the world. Collectively, we are pursuing the original problematique of the Club of Rome, which is human survival on planet Earth. When Aurelio Pacelli originally formulated that mission, there were under 3 billion people on Earth. Now there are 8 billion people, and going to be 10 billion people by 2050. The problematique has only deepened further over the last half century. We feel it is necessary now to build a new civilization, a new eco-civilization, if you will, by reframing economics, by rethinking finance, by dealing with planetary peace and emergencies, and integrating youth leadership and intergenerational dialogue into our activities. These are the 5 areas in which the Club of Rome is working, and I invite you to go to their website to see some more details about it. Throughout these 4 decades that I have worked, I've continued to study and publish regularly on problems that I encounter in practice. This is not a typical model for, at least for American academics, who tend to remain much more within academic and disciplinary confines. My knowledge creation activities have been driven by real-world problems. For me, it has been very gratifying because it has sharpened my own understanding of the world, and even though the world hasn't transformed itself, I feel very rewarded for even the small changes that I have been able to bring in. I would like to now turn to some comments about where we are headed, particularly for the young people in the room. I think one way to summarize where we are headed is in the term Anthropocene. I don't know how many of you have heard of this term. It is being used about to describe the condition of the world, particularly going forward. So my view about the Anthropocene is both optimistic and decisional. We are at a point of decision in history. We are at a point of profound discontinuity. Things are not going to be the same as they were in prior generations. Your generation, the student generation, is going to face a very different world. In the past 75 years, our population has grown 4-fold, and it will stabilize at 10 billion. Our global economy has grown 10-fold. Our consumption of Earth's resources are out of bounds. Water, trees, oceans, mountains, land, forest, we have been consuming them at a pace that is not sustainable. Of the planetary boundaries that are needed to support life on Earth, of the 9 of those boundaries, on 7 of them, we are on the verge of crossing them, including climate change and land use change and biosphere integrity and novel entities in the atmosphere, fresh water, biogeochemical flows. All of these boundaries, we are almost at the point of breaching them. Human social and economic activities have disrupted many natural cycles. What we used to think of natural cycles, water, hydrological cycle, there is rain, comes down on Earth, it goes into the ocean, it evaporates. There's a cycle. That cycle is affected by what we do now. The carbon cycle, the amount of carbon that goes out and back into the system. All those natural cycles are now driven by human activity, human economic activity and social activity. And as a result of this, many natural ecosystems are collapsing or on the verge of collapsing. Many people are experiencing a polycrisis, crisis in virtually every system that they engage with. There is intense economic disparity among people and among nations, with over 50% of the global wealth controlled by a few thousand billionaires, while over 2 billion people are still living in multidimensional poverty. Humans aspire to a more humane and just world in which poverty is eliminated and inequalities are reduced. We are also realizing that there are upper limits, ecological limits, to how much, and thermodynamic limits, to how big an economy we can grow. The kind of growth that we have experienced is very unequal. If we continue to do that, we might have a world in which we produce more billionaires and more hungry people. So we need to make changes. Economics is the engine. Business is the heart of wealth creation, and we need to rethink that. The massive havoc caused to natural ecosystems is now routinely resulting in mass violence of extreme weather events, forest fires, flooding, resulting in millions of deaths each year. Add to this the 5 million excess deaths that occur worldwide due to pollution. We also have lost 3 to 5 million to the COVID pandemic. We humans are currently in the midst of multiple active wars, one right in your neighborhood, among nuclear-powered nations, Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Gaza, probably with the involvement of Iran. And there are many other armed conflicts ongoing. We also have about 12,500 bombs, atomic bombs, in our arsenal. And we spend $2.4 trillion a year in military expenditures. This is not a stable situation. This is not a sane situation. This should not be considered a normal situation. We have self-inflicted ourselves with all these different crises and risks, some of which are reaching the level of being existential risks. So we cannot do business as usual. That is my main message. We have to change, and we probably have to change everything we do, or at least put it in the table for examination. We cannot take for granted past values, principles, systems, and processes. Much of the current condition of the Anthropocene are human-induced. They are self-inflicted. We have an understanding of our problems. We have good science to build solutions. The lack of comprehension of existential challenges of humanity and our reluctance to learn and change to overcome these challenges is what we at the Club of Rome call the gap in systems change. We need to change systems whole scale. We must work to overcome this gap, and business and the economy are important keys to the gap. So I'll end this prepared talk by pointing to a few things that responsible business and economics would lead us to in the era of the Anthropocene. So this dissonance between thinking and action has been going on for decades. We have known that there are limits to growth since the Club of Rome report in 1972. We have known and we have done inquiries into reasons which prevent us from acting on the knowledge that we have. And that was the main topic of one of our Club of Rome reports called No Limits to Learning, published in 1979. The human systems change gap is the difference in our capacity to transform everything around us and our capacity to deal with its consequences. One of our main instruments in transformation is economics and business. These are engines of wealth creation, but historically, wealth creation has meant extraction, taking out of nature, whether it is agriculture, taking it out of soil and leaving the soil dead, or taking wood and trees out of the forest and killing the forest, or taking fish and other marine life out of lakes and rivers and the ocean and filling it with pollution and killing the ocean. This extractive mindset, this extractive model of the economy cannot sustain. It is going to crash all the ecosystems that remain. We need an alternative mindset that I call regenerative mindset. By regenerative, I mean you take something out, but you put something back in. If you take agricultural product out, find ways of renewing the soil. Don't just leave the soil in a way that after 20 or 30 years of extraction, it cannot produce any agriculture. So this regenerative economy and regenerative living is what we are arguing in favor of, working ourselves towards an ecologically sensible civilization. For corporations, they can't just continue to maximize wealth at any cost for shareholders and for investors while they externalize their responsibilities for pollution and ecological destruction. They also continue to exploit labor. This kind of operation needs to come to a stop. There is good science, and business schools like the Corvinus Business School is leading some of the thinking in an alternative way to approach business and wealth creation. In the Anthropocene, we need systems of wealth creation with social purpose and within the context of ecological limits that we now face. We need wealth for the collective well-being of all people within individual countries, but all people on earth. So inequality is a very central problem of the Anthropocene that corporations and businesses will need to solve. We can and should build businesses and economies not on the principle of extraction, but in the principles of regeneration. Businesses not focused on growth at any cost, but instead focused on sufficiency and meeting needs of people and a healthy planet. Businesses that do not just exploit internal technological, labor, and financial efficiencies, but also build resilience in our organizations and communities. Economics and business education has a great role to play here in creating this new economy, this new regenerative economy of the future. There are many, many efforts in progress seeking to bring about this kind of different, ecologically sensible, socially just, and fair economy. The UN Sustainable Development Goals that I've referred to earlier and many of you are familiar with. There is also something called the Well-Being Economy Alliance. There are the principles of responsible management education are some examples. But despite these efforts, systems-wide changes are not happening fast enough, they're not happening deep enough. We need to collaborate, we need to join forces in the great transformation that Karl Polanyi referred to over 80 years ago. His message remains relevant to the Anthropocene. We need new transformation. We need to transform everything now. I look forward to collaborating with you and Corvinus University of Budapest to make business education fit for the Anthropocene. Thank you very much for the great honor today. I'm grateful, and thank you for your patience. Happy to answer any questions.